Okay, guys, let's get started. First of all, I'm so sorry I'm not in today. Cam is pretty sick, so we're going to be heading to the doctor here in a little bit. But it's super important that we finish up with Chapter 5 because it is on your midterm, which is on Wednesday. The plan, just so you know, for the rest of the week is that on Friday we'll go over any questions you have on 4 and 5 after we've gone through the lectures and you've listened to the lectures and watched it. And then any extra time we'll use to go over anything you have for the midterm, anything we've covered this year. And then on Tuesday will be devoted completely to going over any questions you have of things we've covered this year for the first half that will be on your midterm. So I'm going to ask that over the weekend you please come prepared to class on Tuesday with any questions that you may have regarding previous concepts that we've covered this year that you're still having questions on. But for right now, let's get started on Chapter 5, Section 4, Asexual Reproduction. If you take a look here, this word asexual, a means without and sexual, without sex, which basically means there's other methods of reproduction in which organisms can reproduce. We all watch SpongeBob, right? We know that SpongeBob is a sponge, and basically if a little piece of SpongeBob breaks off, technically it can become a new SpongeBob. And that's one of the types of reproduction we're going to talk about in this slide. So let's get started. Okie doke. The first type of asexual reproduction we're going to talk about is called binary fission. And one of the most important things I want you to remember in regards to binary fission is that bacteria are who produce by binary fission. If you remember, bacteria are prokaryotes. So always, when we think about prokaryotes, always think bacteria. That's something we learned, I think, back in chapter 3, maybe? I forget. But asexual reproduction is the creation of offspring from a single parent. Binary fission produces two daughter cells genetically identical. That's another important concept there, guys, that it is genetically identical to the parent, which is basically what happens in mitosis. So you start off with a single parent cell, the DNA replicates, and then the cell divides. Very simple. And you end up with two daughter cells that are exactly the same as their parent. So binary fission is a very simple way for things to replicate. It's the reason why bacteria can reproduce so quickly, because it doesn't take a lot of time to just simply copy DNA and then split in half, right? Every morning you wake up with stinky breath called halitosis. That's because bacteria are multiplying quickly within your mouth throughout the night because they have a nice warm, moist, and dark environment, which is the perfect environment for bacteria to grow and replicate. And they do that via binary fission. So that's a very important concept that we talk about. And let's move on. Alright guys, the next thing we need to talk about is the differences between asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction in regards to advantages, which one is better versus the other. An environment is what determines what form of reproduction is really most advantageous. So for bacteria who reproduce quickly in an environment that's warm and moist and dark, that allows for them to reproduce very quickly because they're doing binary fission, asexual reproduction, and simply they're copying their DNA and splitting in half. They do that very quickly, and that's an advantage. For sexual reproduction, which other organisms do, such as humans, the advantage here is that we can reproduce in changing conditions. It doesn't have to be consistent. One of the disadvantages, and I'll use humans since I started with that as our example, is that we reproduce slowly, right? So a human typically takes 9 months to reproduce. I mean, that's a very long period of time versus these bacteria that can go from 1 to million in a period of a night, in an evening. Here's some disadvantages, however. The disadvantage for bacteria is that if their environment changes, so something happens and we don't have any more conditional or favorable conditions, those bacteria are going to die off very quickly. And because they're genetically identical, it's going to kill off all of them. Humans, because we reproduce sexually, we have a lot of genetic variation. If you take a look around our classroom, you'll see that there is variation within our classroom. And that works out in our favor because if something were to come along that changed our environment and caused something to happen that was, that could hurt us, there'll be variation in terms of there'll be those who are stronger and can survive that change, and there would be others who are weaker and would not be able to survive that change. So if something came along that changed those conditions, it wouldn't wipe out an entire population. So that's the differences there. All right, guys, let's finish up this section by going over the 3 types of asexual reproduction in addition to the binary fission. The first one is called budding, and it says here that budding forms a new organism from a small projection growing on the surface of the plant. The 2 examples they give you here are hydra, and as you can see, here is the bud coming off of the hydra, and here is the bud coming off of the yeast. And those will go on to become new organisms. The next type of asexual reproduction is called fragmentation. It says here that fragmentation is the splitting of the parent into pieces that each grow into a new organism. Some examples are good friends Patrick and SpongeBob, right? Patrick is a starfish, and both sponges and starfish reproduce by fragmentation. In other words, if a piece of a starfish or a sponge break off, that piece will then go on to become a new organism. So that is an example of fragmentation. And then the last one, guys, is vegetative reproduction. It says here that vegetative reproduction forms a new plant from the modification of a stem or an underground structure on the parent plant. And as you can see here, looking at a potato, and what happens is that stem, which is underground, forms the potato, and that is how it reproduces. So vegetative reproduction is the last one. So just a quick review. 4 types of asexual reproduction you should know. Binary fission, which is what bacteria do, but bacteria are prokaryotes. Then you have budding, fragmentation, and vegetative reproduction. Review these, guys, and if you have any questions, please make sure we talk about it on Friday. All right, I'll see you soon. Bye.